You never really know what home is until you're standing outside of it, looking in, and realizing you can't go back. You never truly understand the word family until the person you'd lay down your life for looks you in the eye and shuts the door in your face. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday. The air was still warm from the afternoon sun, and the taxi cab idled at the curb, its engine a quiet, impatient hum. I remember the sound of the car door closing, a solid, final thud that seemed to echo in the quiet of my street. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. I stood there, leaning heavily on my cane, the unhealed wound from my hip surgery throbbing with a dull, persistent ache that had become the soundtrack to my life for the last 3 weeks. 21 days in the hospital. It feels like an eternity when you're trapped there, when the world outside your world keeps spinning without you. Complications from a simple hip replacement. That's what they called it. A fever that wouldn't break, an infection that clung to me with a terrifying tenacity. I fought it, lying in that sterile bed, my only thought, my only prayer, being to get back here. Back to the 2-story house that stood before me now, bathed in the soft, golden light of the late afternoon. Home. Anthony and I bought this place when we were young and foolish and brimming with dreams. It was a wreck then, a faded beauty that everyone else had given up on. But we saw its soul. For 30 years of marriage, we poured ourselves into it. We sanded these floors until our arms ached. We painted these walls. We planted those roses by the walkway. They were still there, my roses, though they looked a little wild now, a little neglected after my absence. They needed tending. I remember making a mental note to get my gardening gloves out first thing in the morning. "Need help with your bags, ma'am?" the taxi driver asked, his voice pulling me from my thoughts. He was a young man, with kind eyes that flickered with a hint of pity as he glanced at my cane. "Just to the door, please," I replied. My voice was rough, scratchy from the dry, recycled hospital air. "My son, he should be waiting for me inside." The driver nodded, hoisting my small suitcase. It was all I had with me. The rest of my life was waiting for me behind that familiar, dark green door. As we made our slow way up the path, the front door swung open before we even reached the porch, and there he was, my Richard, my only son. The relief that washed over me was so profound it nearly buckled my knees. He was here. Everything was going to be okay now. I was home. But then I saw his face. It wasn't the smile I had been picturing for 3 weeks. It wasn't the look of concern, or love, or welcome. His face was a mask I didn't recognize. Cold, distant, resolute. He stood squarely in the doorway, not stepping out to greet me, not moving aside to let me in. He just stood there, blocking the entrance to my own home. "Richard?" I said, my voice faltering slightly. "What's going on?" The taxi driver set my suitcase down beside me, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He shuffled his feet, uncomfortable. I fumbled in my purse, paid him quickly, my hands trembling. Suddenly, I didn't want him to leave. I wanted him to stay, a buffer between me and this strange, unsettling version of my son. As the taxi pulled away, the silence it left behind was deafening. "You shouldn't have come back today," Richard said, his voice echoing that same dry, formal tone I'd heard for years from junior bankers trying to sound important. "We were expecting you tomorrow." A shiver ran through me, a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air or my recovering body. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. "What are you talking about?" I asked, forcing a steadiness into my voice that I did not feel. "We made arrangements. You were going to pick me up." "What is this, Richard?" I took a step forward, leaning on the cane. He didn't move. Behind him, in the shadowy living room, I caught a glimpse of movement. his wife, Veronica. And were those her parents? What were Raymond and Claudia Sterling doing in my living room? There's no easy way to say this, Richard continued, as if he'd rehearsed the lines. Things changed while you were in the hospital. This house, it's no longer yours. The words didn't make sense. They were sounds, empty and absurd, bouncing off the surface of my mind without sinking in. No longer yours. I looked past him, at the familiar hallway, at the photograph of Anthony and me on our wedding day that still hung on the wall. How could it not be mine? What are you talking about? I repeated the words a desperate whisper. We made arrangements. This is my home. Veronica's parents needed to move from Dallas, he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. This house has much more space than you need alone. The documents are already signed. You'll have to find somewhere else to live. Documents, the word cut through the fog of my disbelief. I hadn't signed anything. I'd been fighting a fever, drifting in and out of consciousness. I hadn't signed a single thing. Richard, this is absurd, I said, a spark of my old self igniting. The self that had overseen bank compliance, that had stared down men in suits who thought they could pull a fast one. Let me into my house, right now. I stepped forward again, this time with more purpose. And that's when Veronica appeared beside him, materializing from the shadows of my home. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. She wore a sleek black dress, and as she moved, the light caught her ears. My breath hitched. She was wearing my emerald earrings, the ones Anthony had given me for our 25th anniversary. The ones I kept in my jewelry box, the ones that were supposed to go to my future granddaughter. Isabella, she said, her voice dripping with that false, cloying sweetness I had learned to identify over the years. We've already packed your personal belongings. They're in boxes in the garage. We can have them sent to you, wherever you end up staying. From behind them, Veronica's parents emerged. Raymond Sterling, tall and arrogantly athletic for his age, his silver hair combed back with precision. Claudia, beside him, her face a perpetually sour mask of judgment. I'd never liked them. Over the years, I'd seen them maybe a handful of times, and each time, Claudia had never bothered to hide her disdain for my modest home. The very house she now stood in, looking around as if she were the lady of the manor. I'm sorry it came to this, Raymond said, though he sounded about as sorry as a cat that's just caught a mouse. But Richard made the arrangements very clear. The house was legally transferred. Legally? I managed to stammer. My heart was hammering against my ribs. That's impossible. I never signed anything. Richard's face hardened, his jaw tightening. Power of attorney, he said, the words hitting me with the force of a physical blow. Remember those papers you signed before your surgery? The ones for medical decisions? They also included financial matters. The world tilted on its axis. Yes, I remembered. A stack of documents, handed to me by my own son. The night before my operation, my mind clouded with anxiety about the anesthesia, about the recovery. He'd said, "Just sign here, Mom. It's just a formality. In case they need to make any decisions for you while you're under." I had trusted him. I had signed without reading past the first page. I had signed my life away. "You tricked me," I said. The words sounded hollow, pathetic, utterly insufficient against the magnitude of this betrayal. "We're doing what's best for everyone," Veronica interjected, her tone dismissive. "This house is too much for you to maintain on your own. Richard has been managing it for years anyway." "Don't show up here again," Richard finished, his voice firm, final. "We'll send your things. The decision is made." I stood there, frozen, leaning on that stupid cane, staring at the son I had raised, the boy I'd read bedtime stories to, the teenager I'd stayed up waiting for, teaching him to drive in an empty parking lot on Sundays, the young man whose college tuition I'd paid by working double shifts, by scrimping and saving, by putting his future above everything else. Now, he was a stranger wearing my son's face. "This is illegal," I said, my voice soft but clear, the voice I used to use when I was about to shut down a multi-million-dollar scheme. "And you know it." "It's done," he replied coldly. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." And that's when something broke inside me, but not in the way they might have expected. There were no tears, no begging, no pleas. Instead, a freezing, crystalline clarity washed over me. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced since my years in the bank, since the days of overseeing compliance and sniffing out deception. It was a cold, hard determination. They thought I was a helpless old woman, a frail, recovering patient they could discard on the doorstep like yesterday's newspaper. They were wrong. "Enjoy it, then," I said simply, turning away from them. From my son, from my house, from my life. Enjoy everything. The confusion on their faces at my calmness, at my lack of hysterics, was almost worth the devastation. Almost. I limped back toward the street, my mind already racing, the pain in my hip a distant echo compared to the searing pain in my heart. But I had been prepared for a fight, even if I hadn't known its shape. I had asked the taxi to wait, just around the corner, a foresight that now felt like a divine premonition. I pulled out my phone from my pocket. My hands were steady. I wasn't going to call the police. Not yet. That would come later, in my own time, in my own way. They wanted to play a game of legal paperwork and cold-hearted strategy. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I opened my messaging app and typed a single, pre-arranged message to the one person in the world I trusted completely. My friend of 40 years, Gloria Evans. The message was just 2 words, Plan B. Then I got into the waiting taxi and gave the driver the address of a hotel in downtown Phoenix. As we pulled away from the curb, from my roses, from my life, I didn't look back. I was Isabella Hayes, retired bank compliance officer, and I had just declared war. The hotel room was exactly what you'd expect. Impersonal, clean. A box with a bed and a television. A temporary refuge. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, my hands finally beginning to tremble as the adrenaline faded. I stared at my phone, waiting. It buzzed almost instantly. Gloria's reply. "Stay safe. I'm on my way." Gloria Evans and I had been friends since our college days. She had become a formidable lawyer, a force of nature in the courtroom, while I had built my career on the other side of the ledger, in the meticulous world of bank compliance. After Anthony's death, she was the one who had helped me organize my affairs, who had sat with me for hours, her sharp legal mind combined with a shared, professional paranoia. "Always have a backup plan, Isabella," she'd told me, her voice serious. "Especially when it comes to family and money. You can love them with all your heart, but you must protect yourself with all your mind." At the time, I'd thought she was being cynical, exaggerating. Anthony and I had raised a good man. Richard would never. Now, her foresight seemed almost prophetic. A soft, firm knock on the door announced her arrival. Despite the late hour, Gloria looked impeccable, as always. She wore a tailored pantsuit, her silver, hair pulled back into a severe, elegant bun. But her expression, usually so composed, was pure, undiluted fury. She stepped inside and wrapped me in a careful, fierce hug, mindful of my healing body. "Those miserable vultures," she whispered, her voice thick with rage. She held me at arm's length, her sharp eyes scanning my face. "Are you all right? Physically? Emotionally?" I attempted a smile, but I knew it didn't reach my eyes. "I'm standing," I said. "Which is something. The rest. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all be a nightmare. A fever dream from the infection." Gloria's expression softened for a fleeting second before the professional mask slid back into place. She placed her leather briefcase on the cheap hotel desk and began pulling out files with a practiced, efficient grace. "I've already started the process," she said, her voice all business now. "The trust documentation is solid. Anthony was meticulous, God bless him. The house transfer, no matter what documents they forged, will not withstand legal scrutiny. It's built on fraud, and we will tear it down." "How long?" I asked, my voice quiet. "How long to invalidate this fraudulent transfer?" "A few weeks," she said, not looking up from her files. "Maybe a few months if they decide to play dirty and drag it out." She paused then and looked up at me, her gaze intense. "But Isabella, there's something else. Something I found while I was doing a preliminary review of your accounts." My stomach clenched into a cold, hard knot. "What is it?" She handed me a printed bank statement. "Unusual withdrawals. Large ones, made during your hospitalization." I took the paper, my banking experience immediately kicking in, my eyes scanning the columns of numbers. There they were. 5 transfers, all to account numbers I didn't recognize, all made with digital signatures that were purportedly from me. The total was staggering, over $220,000. While I was in the ICU, I whispered, the full weight of the betrayal settling deep in my bones, crushing me. "They didn't just take my house, they've been draining my accounts while I was barely conscious." Gloria nodded, her face grave. "There's more. My legal assistant did a quick check on the Sterlings. Their real estate consulting business in Dallas. It has a trail of complaints that were mysteriously withdrawn before any formal investigation could begin. And Veronica's LinkedIn profile shows she worked at 3 different mortgage companies that all ended up shutting down due to regulatory violations." The pieces, jagged and horrifying, began to click into place with a chilling clarity. "They're involved in mortgage fraud," I said, the term familiar and ugly from my past. Gloria gave a single, sharp nod. "And I believe they've been planning this for months. Your hospitalization, it gave them the perfect opportunity to accelerate their timeline." My mind raced, stumbling back through conversations from the past year. Veronica's sudden, intense interest in my finances. Richard's seemingly casual questions about my bank contacts, my investment portfolio. The foundation of this betrayal hadn't been laid in the hospital. It had been built, brick by treacherous brick, long before I ever went under the knife. "Richard," I said, his name catching in my throat like a shard of glass. Do you think he knows what they're really doing?" Gloria's silence was more damning than any words could have been. "I taught him better than that," I murmured, the words barely audible. "His father taught him better. People change, Isabella," Gloria replied, her tone soft but firm. "Especially when a lot of money is involved. The question now is, what do you want to do about it?" I closed my eyes. I felt the weight of my 67 years, the weight of a career built on integrity, the weight of a family I thought I had, the weight of the home I had made with the man I loved. When I opened them, I looked directly at Gloria, and something inside me had solidified, hardened into an unbreakable resolve. "Everything," I answered, my voice clear and steady in the quiet hotel room. "I want to do everything possible to reclaim what's mine, and I want to make them face the consequences, all of them, even Richard." Gloria's eyebrow arched almost imperceptibly, a question. "No maternal protection clause," I said, the words hurting as I spoke them, but they were true. "He made his choice. If he's involved in something illegal, he deserves what's coming to him." A slow, satisfied smile touched Gloria's lips. Good. Then we'll have to be smart, strategic. I have contacts in the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit who would be very interested in what we've uncovered. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I have some contacts too, I replied, my mind already scrolling through a mental Rolodex of former colleagues. But I don't want to move too quickly. Not yet. They think I'm defeated. They think I'm a helpless old woman who will just quietly fade away. That perception, that gives us an advantage. What are you thinking? Gloria asked, leaning forward. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, black, leather-bound notebook, my lifeline during my banking years, where I noted patterns, discrepancies, the subtle scent of deception. First, I said, opening the notebook to a fresh page, we document everything. Every withdrawal, every forged document, every lie they told me on that porch. Then, we follow the money trail. If they're setting up a fraud operation here in Phoenix, there will be patterns. There always are. Gloria smiled. That sharp, predatory smile I remembered from our youth, from when we were two young women ready to take on the world. And then? She asked. And then? I said, feeling a cold, purposeful determination coursing through my veins. We spring the trap when they least expect it. As we began to outline the first steps of our plan, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up. It was a text message from Richard. Mom, we need the passwords to your investment accounts to transfer the remaining funds for your care. Send them as soon as possible. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. The cold-blooded gall. I showed the message to Gloria, who shook her head in utter disgust. What do I say? I asked her, my finger hovering over the screen. Nothing, she replied without a moment's hesitation. You say nothing at all. Let them wonder. Let them sit in that house and worry. Silence is a weapon, Isabella. Use it. I nodded, setting the phone aside without replying. The old Isabella, the mother, the peacemaker, would have responded instantly. She would have tried to calm the waters, to soothe, to maintain the fragile peace at any cost. But that Isabella had been left behind on the porch of the house they stole from me. This Isabella, the one sitting in a nondescript hotel room, her life in ruins, her heart in fragments, this Isabella was playing the long game. And the game had just begun. The new suite smelled of lemony disinfectant and new carpet, a sterile scent that held no memories, good or bad. For the first 2 days that was a blessing. There was nothing here to remind me of Anthony, of Richard, of the life that had been stolen from me. It was a blank slate, a command center in a war I never asked to fight. But by the third morning, the silence began to feel less like peace and more like a cage. The four walls seemed to be closing in, and the only thing echoing in the room was the relentless, pounding question. How could he? Gloria was my tether to the outside world, to action, to purpose. She arrived each morning like a general, her briefcase filled with new intelligence, her mind sharp and unsentimental. We had established a routine. First, coffee. Then, the grim accounting of my financial ruin. Today, she placed a new stack of papers on the small dining table that served as our war room. The full audit is complete, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. She could have been reading a grocery list. The total is $487,612.18. The precision of it, down to the 18 cents, was like a final mocking twist of the knife. It wasn't just a large round number anymore. It was a precise calculation of everything I had saved, everything Anthony and I had worked for, quantified and stolen. They were thorough, I remarked, my voice flat. I picked up the top sheet, a summary of the transactions. The dates were a timeline of my hospitalization. The largest withdrawals coincided with the days I was in the ICU, heavily sedated, fighting for my health while they were pilfering my future. Thorough, but not infallible, Gloria countered. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on a specific line item. See this, a transfer of $75,000 to an escrow account. The title company is listed. And this one, $50,000 to a city planning facilitator services firm. That's a fancy name for a bribe. This was the shift we needed. This wasn't just them moving money into a hidden account. This was the stolen cash being put to work. This was the seed money being planted, and we were now seeing the first ugly sprouts. This is the proof, I said, a flicker of energy cutting through the heavy blanket of my despair. This directly links my stolen money to their property scheme. It's a strong thread, Gloria agreed. But we need to pull on it and see the whole tapestry. We need to understand the entire flow. Where did the money go after these initial payments? We need to follow it all the way to the end. This was my world, following the money. It was a language I understood better than almost anyone. The Sterlings might have been clever fraudsters, but they were up against a woman who had spent decades understanding the secret pathways of finance, the patterns that criminals always left behind. Give me access, I said, turning to Gloria's laptop. I need to see the raw data. For the next several hours, I fell into the familiar, almost meditative state of forensic accounting. It was grim, painstaking work, but it was also a relief to be using this part of my brain again. This was a problem I could solve. This was a puzzle with a logical, if monstrous, answer. I started with the escrow payment. The title company was a small, local outfit I'd never heard of. A quick search showed it had been incorporated only 6 months ago. A shell company. I traced the $75,000. It was used to close on the Miller property. My stolen money had bought my neighbor's house. A cold fury began to burn in my chest, quiet and focused. I moved to the next transaction. The facilitator services, payment. The firm had a glossy, meaningless website. I cross-referenced the business registration. The registered agent was a lawyer whose name I recognized from a news article about a zoning corruption scandal a few years back. So, Raymond was bribing city officials to fast-track his rezoning request. He was using my money to corrupt my city. I kept digging, following each thread. I mapped the transfers onto a digital whiteboard Gloria had set up, creating a visual web of deceit. Lines connected my accounts to shell companies, from those shell companies to property purchases, and from those properties to Sterling Investment Properties, LLC. It's a circle, I murmured, more to myself than to Gloria. A self-feeding fraud. Gloria looked up from her own legal pad. Explain. They're using my money as the initial capital to buy the first few properties. Then, they're using the deeds of those properties as collateral to secure loans to buy more properties. They're leveraging my stolen assets to build their empire. It's a house of cards, but it's a clever one. If the rezoning goes through, the value of all those properties skyrockets overnight. They pay off the loans, pocket millions, and no one is the wiser about where the seed money came from. And if the rezoning fails? Gloria asked, though I could see she already knew the answer. The loans go into default, the banks foreclose. But Sterling Investment Properties is just a limited liability company. It declares bankruptcy. Raymond and Veronica walk away, protected. And the people who lose are the original homeowners they tricked into selling, the banks, and... I paused, the final, ugly piece snapping into place. And me. I'm the one who provided the unsecured, stolen capital. I'd be the biggest loser of all. The sheer, elegant brutality of it was breathtaking. They had not only stolen my past, they had positioned me to absorb the catastrophic financial loss of their future failure. I was their unwitting, unwilling insurance policy. Just then, my phone buzzed. Not a text this time, but a call. It was Richard. My heart slammed against my ribs. I hadn't heard his voice since he'd thrown me out. I looked at Gloria, my eyes wide. She looked at the phone, then back at me, her expression unreadable. "Don't answer," she said quietly. "But let it go to voicemail. I want to hear what he has to say." I watched the phone vibrate, each ring a little earthquake in the quiet room. It felt like an eternity. Finally, it stopped. A few seconds later, a notification popped up. Voicemail. My hand trembled as I reached for the phone. I put it on speaker. "Mom." His voice sounded strained, tired, a good act. "It's Richard. Look, I'm getting really concerned. You're not answering your texts, and now you're not picking up. I need those passwords, it's urgent. Veronica's parents are covering the bills for now, but we need to get this sorted out. For your own good. Please, just call me back. Let me know you're okay." The message ended. The room was silent again. The performance was masterful. The tone of a worried son, just trying to do what was best for his frail, confused mother. It was so convincing that for a split second I felt a pang of doubt. What if I was wrong? What if there was some horrible misunderstanding? Then I looked at the web of financial destruction mapped out on the laptop screen. The $75,000 of my money that had bought the Miller house. The $50,000 bribe, the cold, hard data didn't lie. "He's good," Gloria said, breaking the silence. Her voice was like chipped ice. He almost had me feeling sorry for him for a second. "He learned from the best," I replied, my voice thick with a pain I could no longer suppress. "He learned how to lie from watching his father and me navigate the corporate world. He just uses it for evil instead of good." The voicemail had done one thing. It had lit a fire under me. The pity party was over. The time for passive data collection was ending. "We have the financial link," I said, standing up and pacing the small room, my cane tapping a determined rhythm on the tile. "We have the property records, we have the motive. It's time to go on the offensive. We need to find the human element. We need to talk to the other victims." Gloria nodded slowly. "It's a risk. If the Sterlings get wind that we're talking to their targets, then let them," I said, a new boldness taking hold. "Let them know I'm not hiding. Let them know I'm fighting back. It might make them reckless. And reckless criminals make mistakes." My first target was Old Man Miller. Arthur Miller. He and his wife, Betty, had been our neighbors for 30 years. He was a quiet, kind man, a retired engineer who had doted on his wife. After Betty died, a part of him seemed to wither away. He'd tended her rose garden with a heartbreaking devotion, but the light in his eyes had never fully returned. I couldn't call him. His phone line might be monitored, or worse, he might mention my call to the wrong person out of sheer loneliness. It had to be in person. This required a new level of tradecraft. Gloria rented a nondescript sedan, paying in cash. I wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, a ridiculous disguise that made me feel like a character in a bad spy movie, but it was necessary. We couldn't be seen. We parked a block away from Arthur's house in the late afternoon. It was a strange and painful feeling, sneaking around my own neighborhood like a thief. I saw my house down the street. The sight of it sent a physical jolt through me. The roses were gone. In their place were bland, generic shrubs. They had already begun erasing me. "Are you sure about this?" Gloria asked, her hand on my arm. "No," I admitted. "But it's the next logical step. Wait here." I got out of the car and walked slowly toward Arthur's house, using my cane, trying to look like any other elderly woman out for a stroll. My heart was pounding. What if he slammed the door in my face? What if he was in on it? I rang the bell. The chime echoed inside. After a long moment, the door opened a crack, the security chain still on. Arthur's weary, confused face appeared in the gap. "Isabella," he said, his voice raspy with surprise. "Is that you?" I heard you'd moved away. To a home." The lie they were spreading. Of course. They were painting me as the frail, senile mother who had to be put away, sanitizing their narrative. "No, Arthur," I said softly, making sure my face was visible. "I didn't move away. I was thrown out by my son." His eyes widened in shock. The chain rattled, and he opened the door fully. He looked older, more shrunken than the last time I'd seen him. "Thrown out. But," Richard said. "Richard lied, Arthur," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you about the people you sold your house to." He hesitated, a flicker of fear in his eyes. I don't want any trouble." "Neither do I, Arthur, but I think we might both already be in it." He finally stepped back and let me in. The house was sparsely furnished, boxes stacked in the living room. It felt like a place waiting for the end. "I'm moving next week," he said, following my gaze. "To a little apartment near my daughter in Tucson." "Arthur," I began, choosing my words carefully. "The company that bought your house, Sterling Investment Properties. Can you tell me about the sale? Was it straightforward?" His face crumpled. He sank into a worn armchair, looking defeated. "It was all so confusing," he whispered. "After Betty died, the bills. The property taxes went up. I was struggling. Then this nice young woman, Veronica, she came by. Richard's wife. She said she could help. She said her family's company could give me a cash offer, no realtors, no fuss. It seemed like a blessing. A classic predatory tactic. Prey on grief and financial anxiety." "Did they pressure you?" I asked. Not at first," he said, avoiding my eyes. "But then, after I signed the initial papers, things changed. A man came by, Raymond. He was forceful. He said the offer was contingent on a quick sale. He said if I backed out, there would be legal consequences. He mentioned liens on the house I didn't even know about. I was scared, Isabella. I just wanted it to be over. My blood boiled. They had terrorized this gentle, grieving old man. They had used my son's connection to gain his trust, then used fear to seal the deal. Arthur, the money they used to buy your house," I said, leaning forward. "I have reason to believe it was stolen. From me." His head snapped up, his eyes full of a fresh, horrified understanding. "Oh, my dear Lord. Isabella, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "It's not your fault," I said, placing a hand over his. "You are a victim, just like me. But I'm fighting back, and I could use your help." I spent another 20 minutes with him, getting his permission to access his sale documents, assuring him he wouldn't get in trouble. When I left, I had a signed statement and the name of the notary who had witnessed the signing under what Arthur now believed were dubious circumstances. It was another thread. Back in the car, I relayed the conversation to Gloria. Her face was a mask of grim satisfaction. "It's exactly as we thought. They used your connection to gain access, then used intimidation to close. It's their modus operandi." Our next stop was the Henderson house. But as we drove past, we saw a sold sign already staked in the lawn, and a moving truck was parked in the driveway. It was too late. The Henderson family was already gone. The machine was grinding on, efficient and ruthless. The sight filled me with a renewed sense of urgency. We were documenting a crime that was still in progress. Every day we spent building our case was another day they tightened their grip on my neighborhood. That evening, back in the sterile safety of the suite, Gloria received an email. It was from her investigator friend. He had dug deeper into the Sterling's history in Dallas. "This is it," she said, her voice low and intense as she read. "The smoking gun we needed for the FBI." She turned the laptop toward me. It was a scanned copy of a civil lawsuit, one that had been settled out of court with a strict non-disclosure agreement. The plaintiff was an elderly couple. They accused Raymond Sterling of using a forged power of attorney signed by their son to refinance their home with a predatory loan, eventually forcing them into foreclosure. The details were a mirror image of what was happening to me, just on a smaller scale. It was a pattern. A proven, documented pattern of elder fraud and property theft. "We have them," I whispered, a surge of vindictive triumph rushing through me. "We have their playbook. Now we take it to the professionals," Gloria said, already picking up her phone. "It's time to call Agent Rips." As she made the call, I looked out the window at the darkening Phoenix sky. The money trail had led us here. It had led us through my stolen accounts, through the corrupted purchases of my neighbors' homes, through the terrified eyes of an old man, and straight to a documented history of criminal behavior. The hunter was no longer just tracking her prey, she was now ready to call in the cavalry. The trap was being set. And for the first time since I'd stood on my own porch, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. The human heart is a stubborn organ. Even as my mind accepted the cold, hard evidence of the emails, the proof that my son had been a knowing participant in a plot that treated my surgery as a business opportunity, my heart kept whispering treacherous little maybes. Maybe he was coerced. Maybe he was blackmailed. Maybe he's a victim too. That fragile, desperate hope was about to be systematically dismantled. It started with a quiet knock on the suite door. It was Agent Callahan, alone this time, holding a slim manila envelope. His expression was graver than usual. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, nodding a greeting to Gloria. "We've completed the preliminary analysis of the security footage from the banks and title companies involved in the property transfers. There's something you need to see." My mouth went dry. Security footage. This was no longer about emails and financial trails. This was about to put a face to the betrayal. He set up a small laptop on our table. "This was taken at the Dallas First National Bank," he explained. "The timestamp is 3 weeks ago, 2 days after your surgery. The video was grainy, black and white, but clear enough. It showed the bank's lobby. And then they walked in. Richard and Veronica. They weren't holding hands, but they moved with a united purpose. They were greeted by a loan officer and ushered into a glass-walled office. I watched, my breath caught in my throat, as my son sat down at that desk. I saw him talking, gesturing. I saw Veronica open a large envelope and slide documents across the table. "What are they doing?" I whispered, though I already knew. "According to the bank's records and the access logs we subpoenaed," Agent Callahan said, his voice devoid of inflection, "they were there to access your safe deposit box. The one you kept at that branch for important documents." I felt the air leave my lungs. That box contained the original deed to our house, Anthony's will, the trust papers Gloria had drawn up, the physical, tangible proof of our life together. On the screen, I watched as the loan officer led them to the vault. A few minutes later, they emerged. Richard was holding a metal box. My box. He carried it back to the office, and I watched, helpless, as he opened it and began removing my documents. I saw him hand the deed to Veronica, who examined it with a satisfied, proprietary smile. "They used the power of attorney to gain access," I said, the statement a dull, painful ache. While I was unconscious in the ICU, They were ransacking my past. "There's more," Agent Callahan said softly. He fast-forwarded the footage. "This is from a title company here in Phoenix." A week later, a new video appeared. This one showed Richard and Raymond Sterling together. They were in a conference room, surrounded by paperwork. Raymond was doing most of the talking, but Richard was nodding, signing pages, pointing to clauses. He looked engaged, competent, a willing participant. "They're closing on the Henderson property," Agent Callahan said. "The financing was secured using your banking credentials, Mrs. Hayes. Your financial reputation, built over a lifetime, was used as collateral to steal your neighbor's home." I stared at the screen, at my son's face. There was no fear there, no reluctance. He looked like a young executive, closing a big deal. This wasn't a man being blackmailed or coerced. This was a man who was all in. The last vestiges of my hope shattered. The image of the little boy with the lost wallet was finally, irrevocably, replaced by the man on the screen, calmly selling out his mother and his community. Gloria's hand found mine under the table, a silent anchor in the storm of my devastation. "We have to show her the rest," Gloria said to Agent Callahan, her voice tight. He nodded, closing the video and opening a new file. It was a series of photographs, taken from a distance with a long lens. They showed my house. My house. There was a steady stream of people coming and going, people I didn't recognize. Men in cheap suits carrying briefcases, well-dressed couples who looked nervous and out of place. "What is this?" I asked. "Surveillance from the last 48 hours, Agent Callahan explained. "We believe your house has become their central operations center. We think they're using it to meet with the other homeowners they're targeting, to pressure them into selling, to sign documents. They're using the legitimacy of your address, your home, to lend credibility to their fraud." The violation was so profound it felt like a physical blow. They weren't just living in my house. They were desecrating it. They had turned the home Anthony and I built with love into a factory of fear and theft. Every memory held within those walls was being trampled by greedy footsteps. "We've identified at least 3 more homeowners on your block who are in active negotiations with Sterling Investment Properties," Agent Callahan continued. "One is a widow in her 80s. Another is a family whose special needs child requires expensive care. They're being pressured to sell quickly, for under market value, with threats of complicated legal battles if they refuse." The scale of it was monstrous. It was a cancer, and it was metastasizing through my neighborhood, using my stolen life as its host. "We can't wait any longer," I said, my voice raw but steady. The grief was still there, a bottomless well inside me, but it was now capped with a layer of hardened steel. "You have your evidence of them in the act. You have them on video, using my identity. What are you waiting for?" "The problem is compartmentalization," a new voice said. Agent Rips had let herself into the suite, her arrival silent and efficient. "We can arrest Raymond and Veronica for the financial crimes and the property fraud based on what we have. But we believe Richard is the key to the larger conspiracy, the bribes, the full extent of the mortgage fraud scheme. If we move on the Sterlings now, Richard will likely clam up, get a lawyer, and try to cut a separate deal. We might not ever get the whole picture." She laid a new document on the table. It was a flowchart, created by the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. It detailed the entire operation, with Richard positioned squarely in the middle, a crucial conduit between my assets and the Sterling scheme. "He's not a pawn, Isabella," Gloria said softly, her legal mind analyzing the chart. "He's a knight. He's essential. They needed his relationship to you to get the power of attorney. They needed his presence to make the theft of your assets look legitimate. He's not on the sidelines, he's on the field. The final piece of the puzzle snapped into place, and the picture it formed was unbearable. My son wasn't a misguided boy led astray. He was a co-architect of this nightmare. I stood up and walked to the window, turning my back on the evidence, on the agents, on the painful truth. I looked out at the city, but I didn't see the buildings. I saw Richard's face on the bank video. I saw the for sale signs on my street. I saw Arthur Miller's defeated eyes. "What do you need from me?" I asked, my voice quiet but clear, my back still to them. "We need to confront him," Agent Rip said. "But not with handcuffs, not yet. We need to present him with the evidence we have against him specifically. We need to show him that his only way out of a lengthy prison sentence is to turn on Veronica and her parents and give us everything." "You want me to be part of that confrontation," I stated, turning to face them. "It would be the most powerful approach," Agent Callahan said. "A mother confronting a son with the proof of his betrayal. It's a psychological pressure that we can't replicate. It could break through his denial faster than anything we could do." The room was silent. Gloria was looking at me, her eyes full of a protective worry. The agents were waiting, their faces professional masks. They were asking me to weaponize my motherhood, to use the bond that he had so carelessly shattered as a tool to break him. It was a cruel, brutal ask. But as I thought of the widow down the street, of the family with the sick child, of Arthur Miller packing his boxes, I knew there was no other choice. The neighborhood scheme was bigger than my broken heart. It was a fire, and I was the only one who could carry the water to put it out. "Set it up," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I'll do it." The decision made, a strange calm settled over me. The period of waiting, of being a passive victim, was over. I was stepping back into my life, not as the mother who lived there, but as the woman who was going to take it back. "There's one more thing," I said, an idea forming, cold and sharp. "Before you bring him in, I want to go back. I want to see it for myself." "Isabella." "No," Gloria said immediately. "It's too risky." "They won't be there," I said, thinking of the patterns we'd observed. "Veronica has her weekly salon appointment. Raymond and Claudia are at a real estate viewing across town. Richard won't be home from work until 5. The house will be empty." "How could you possibly know that?" Agent Rips asked, intrigued. "Because I'm his mother," I said, a sad, bitter smile touching my lips. For years, his predictable routine was a comfort. Now, it's a vulnerability. They've been using my knowledge against me. It's time I returned the favor. I wasn't just going to confront my son in a sterile interrogation room. I was going to walk back into the heart of their operation. I needed to see the changes they'd made. I needed to feel the violation firsthand, to let it fuel the cold fury I would need to face him. I was going home, and this time I wouldn't be leaving. The world had shrunk to the 6 feet of space between Raymond Sterling and me. The air in the kitchen was thick with the scent of his cologne and my fear. He stared at the small paring knife in my hand, and a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but of contempt. I was an inconvenience, a buzzing fly he was about to swat. "You think that little thing scares me, Isabella?" He sneered, taking a deliberate step forward. "You can barely stand. Put it down before you hurt yourself." My hips screamed in protest, a white-hot fire that threatened to buckle my leg. But the hand holding the knife remained steady. It wasn't strength that held it there. It was pure, undiluted rage. This man, this parasite, was standing in my kitchen, in the heart of the home I'd built, threatening me. "The only one who's going to get hurt is you, Raymond, when the police get here," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. A lie, but a necessary one. The FBI was coming, not the police, but he didn't need to know that. He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. The police? And what will you tell them? That you broke into my house? That you attacked me with a knife? Who do you think they'll believe? A confused old woman or a respected businessman? He took another step. Now, give me the bag. I know you took something from my office. Behind him, I could see Veronica and Claudia hovering in the hallway, their faces pale but their eyes gleaming with a vicious curiosity. They were vultures, waiting for the kill. My mind raced. The panic button was pressed, but how long would it take? Minutes? Seconds? I had to buy time. I had to keep him talking. Respected? I echoed, putting as much scorn as I could into the word. You're a common thief, a fraud. You prey on the elderly and the vulnerable. There's no respect in that, Raymond. Only cowardice. His smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold fury. My words had hit their mark. Arrogant men hate nothing more than being seen for what they truly are. I am a visionary, he spat. I see potential where others see decay. This neighborhood, your pathetic, crumbling little life, it was all just wasted potential. I'm creating value. I'm building an empire. You're building it on my money, I shot back. On my stolen security. You used my son to rob me blind. What kind of man does that? What kind of man has to steal from an old woman because he can't build anything of his own? I was playing a dangerous game, poking the bear. But I could see the agents in my mind's eye, moving, converging. I just had to hold on. Your son is a grown man, Raymond snarled, taking another step, now close enough that I could see the pores on his nose. He made his choice. He saw a future of mediocrity with you, or a future of wealth and power with us. It wasn't a difficult decision. He chose wisely. The confirmation, spoken with such casual cruelty, was a fresh wound. But I couldn't afford to bleed. Not now. He chose to betray his own mother. I said, my voice dropping, becoming deadlier. And you chose to help him. But your little empire is built on sand, Raymond. I know about the shell companies. I know about the bribes to the planning department. I know about the forged appraisals. It's over. For the first time, a flicker of genuine surprise, followed by unease, crossed his face. He hadn't expected me to know the details. He had underestimated me, severely. You don't know anything. He blustered, but the confidence was cracking. I know everything, I said, and I let a cold smile touch my lips. I spent my career hunting down men like you. You leave a trail, Raymond. You always leave a trail, and I've been following it. His eyes darted to my bag, then back to my face. The need to get that bag, to know what evidence I had, was warring with his caution. The knife was still between us. This is your last chance, he growled, his voice low and menacing. Give me the bag, walk out of here, and we'll forget this happened. You can live out your days in some quiet little apartment, and we'll all move on. If you don't. He left the threat hanging in the air, his meaning clear. It was then that I heard it, a faint, distant sound, sirens. Not the wall of a local police car, but the sharper, more urgent sound of federal vehicles. They were close. Raymond heard it too, his head cocked, his eyes widening in confusion and then dawning horror. He knew that sound didn't belong to a routine domestic disturbance call. The game had changed. What have you done? He whispered, his face draining of color. I told you, I said, my body trembling with adrenaline and relief. I sprung the trap. The sirens grew louder, culminating in the screech of tires right outside the house. Car doors slammed. Heavy, rapid footsteps pounded on the porch. FBI. Open up. The voice was Agent Rip's, sharp and commanding. For a moment Raymond was frozen, a statue of shock and panic. Veronica and Claudia began to shriek in the hallway, a cacophony of useless noise. This was my moment. While he was distracted, I dropped the knife. It clattered harmlessly on the tile. I didn't need it anymore. I took a step back, leaning heavily against the counter, my legs suddenly weak. The front door shuddered under a powerful impact. Once, twice. On the third blow, the wood around the lock splintered and the door burst open. FBI. Hands where we can see them. Agents Rips and Callahan stormed into the living room, weapons drawn, their movements a synchronized ballet of controlled force. 2 more agents followed, securing Veronica and Claudia, who were now sobbing and protesting. Raymond Sterling stood alone in the kitchen doorway, his hands slowly rising into the air. The empire builder had been reduced to a suspect in his own stolen kingdom. Agent Rips's eyes scanned the room, taking in the scene: the overturned chair, my pale, shaken form by the counter, the knife on the floor, and Raymond, caught in the act. "Are you all right, Mrs. Hayes?" she asked, her weapon still trained on Raymond as Agent Callahan moved in to cuff him. "I am now," I managed, my voice a ragged whisper. As the cold metal clicked around Raymond's wrists, the reality of the situation seemed to finally crash down on him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, desperate energy. "This is a misunderstanding," he yelled, struggling against the cuffs. "She broke in. She attacked me. Look, she had a knife." Agent Callahan ignored him, reciting his Miranda rights in a calm, steady monotone. Agent Rips came to my side, her professional demeanor softening for a fraction of a second. The panic button worked. We were monitoring the house. We came as fast as we could. Her eyes fell to my bag. Were you able to get anything?" Wordlessly, I reached into my bag and pulled out Richard's black notebook. I handed it to her. She opened it, her eyes scanning a few pages. A grim, satisfied look settled on her face. "This is it," she said, closing the book with a definitive snap. "This is the link. This connects him directly to the conspiracy, the timeline, the intent." She looked at me, her gaze filled with a new respect. "You did it, Isabella. You got what we needed." The praise should have felt like a victory. But as I watched Raymond Sterling being led away in handcuffs, sputtering threats and excuses, all I felt was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The trap had been sprung. The first domino had fallen. But the most painful confrontation was still to come. The agents began to secure the scene. Evidence bags appeared. The house was now a federal crime scene. Gloria arrived moments later, her face a mask of worry that only eased when she saw me standing, unharmed. She wrapped me in a fierce hug. "You foolish, brave woman," she whispered into my hair. I let her hold me for a moment, drawing strength from her solid presence. Then I pulled away. The job wasn't finished. "Richard," I said, looking at Agent Rips, "what happens now with my son?" "The team is en route to his office now," she assured me. "He'll be brought in for questioning." With this, she held up the notebook and the footage, and Raymond in custody. His options are limited. He'll have to deal. I nodded slowly. The hunter had captured one predator, but the one that had once been her cub was still out there. And now I had to face him. Not with a knife, but with the cold, hard truth contained in his own handwritten words. The spring had been released, and there was no going back. The scene inside the house was a controlled chaos of federal efficiency. Agents in blue windbreakers moved with a quiet purpose, placing numbered evidence markers, taking photographs, bagging computers, and file folders from the study. My home had become a crime scene, and the feeling was surreal, a bizarre fusion of violation and vindication. They were cataloging the evidence of my betrayal, but in doing so, they were also reclaiming the space, stripping it of the Sterling's poisonous presence. Gloria guided me to my own living room sofa, the one Anthony and I had chosen. Together. Now just a piece of evidence in a larger tableau, she pressed a glass of water into my hand. Drink, Isabella. The shock will set in soon. But I didn't feel shock. I felt a strange, hyper-awareness. The pain in my hip was a distant thrum, secondary to the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. My eyes kept drifting to the front door, hanging broken on its hinges. It was a symbol. There was no more locking me out. The barriers were down. Agent Rips approached, her phone to her ear. She listened for a moment, then lowered it. "The team has Richard. They're bringing him here." A cold fist clenched in my stomach. "Here? Why here?" "It's strategic," she explained, her voice low. "Confronting him in the heart of the operation, with the evidence all around him, with you present, it breaks down the fantasy. He can't pretend this is a boardroom negotiation. This is his home, or it was, and it's now the center of his downfall." It was brutal psychology. I understood it, even approved of it, but that didn't make the prospect any less terrifying. I was about to face my son not across a dinner table, but across the wreckage of our family. "We'll be outside," Gloria said, her hand on my arm. "You don't have to do this alone." We moved to the unmarked FBI car parked across the street. The evening was beginning to bleed into night, the sky a deep, bruised purple. The familiar street was now bathed in the strobing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles. Curtains twitched in neighboring windows. Faces peered out, shocked and confused. The quiet drama of my betrayal had just become a very public spectacle. I saw Eleanor Jameson, my new neighbor from across the street, standing on her porch, her hand over her mouth. She caught my eye, and I gave a small, grim nod. Her expression shifted from confusion to a dawning, horrified understanding. Then, a new convoy arrived. 2 sedans, they pulled up behind the other vehicles. The back door of the first one opened, and Richard got out. He looked normal. He was still in his work suit, a crisp blue tie loosened at the neck. He had that slightly harried look he always got after a long day at the office. He was frowning at the commotion, his mind clearly trying to process why there were FBI agents at his house. Then his eyes scanned the scene and landed on me, sitting in the passenger seat of the FBI car. I watched the understanding dawn on his face in slow, painful stages. The confusion melted into disbelief, then hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He wasn't being brought here as a son concerned for his mother. He was being brought here because his mother was with the people who had come for him. "It's time," Agent Rips said, opening her door. My legs felt like water. As I stepped out onto the street I'd walked 1,000 times. Gloria was a solid presence at my side. We crossed the street, moving toward the house, toward my son. Veronica was the first to see me. She was being led from the house by a female agent, her hands cuffed in front of her. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared with tears. But when her eyes locked onto mine, the fear was replaced by a venomous hatred. "You!" she spat, her voice a hysterical shriek that cut through the neighborhood's quiet. "You did this, you bitter, crazy old witch." The agent holding her arm tightened her grip, pulling her toward a waiting vehicle. But Veronica twisted, her gaze burning into me. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming. My father will bury you." "Your father is already in custody," I said, my voice calm, carrying easily in the tense air. "And the FBI is searching your offices in Dallas." "It's over, Veronica." The color drained from her face, the bravado evaporating, leaving behind a terrified young woman finally facing the consequences of her monstrous greed. She was shoved into the car without another word, the door slamming shut on her reign in my home. Then, it was just Richard. He stood on the walkway. Agent Callahan, a silent, imposing figure beside him. The public defender, a young man named Marcus Reed, who had been notified upon Richard's detention, stood slightly behind, looking overwhelmed. "Mom?" Richard's voice was small, cracked. What's going on? What are you doing with them?" Agent Callahan answered for me, his tone formal and unyielding. "Your mother has provided evidence of a large-scale financial fraud committed by the Sterling family. We have a warrant to search these premises and confiscate all relevant documents and electronic devices." "Fraud?" Richard repeated the word as if he'd never heard it before. He looked from Agent Callahan to me, his expression one of genuine, bewildered hurt. "What fraud? This is absurd." "It is," I said, stepping forward. My cane tapped a firm, steady rhythm on the concrete path. A sound he had heard his whole life, now turned into a drumbeat of his judgment. Raymond was very clear this morning. He admitted to using my banking credentials to secure fraudulent financing. In my study, in my house, Veronica's face, from inside the car, was a pale oval of shock. "You were here?" she mouthed silently. "The side door," I replied, my gaze still fixed on my son. "There are some things about this house you never bothered to learn, Veronica. Like the fact that it legally belongs to a trust created by my late husband, a trust that cannot be transferred without the signature of all trustees." I glanced at Gloria. Including Gloria, who certainly never signed anything. Richard was shaking his head, a desperate, denying motion. "Mom, it's been a misunderstanding. We wanted to help you." The audacity of the lie, delivered with such plaintive sincerity, stole my breath for a moment. "By stealing my house?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "By draining my accounts? By setting up your in-laws in a property scheme that preys on our neighbors? By using my financial reputation, the reputation I spent a lifetime building, to orchestrate this theft? That's not helping, Richard. That's fraud. That's conspiracy." Each word was a hammer blow, shattering the fragile narrative he had built for himself. I could see him crumbling under their weight. "Mrs. Sterlinghayes," Agent Rip said, interrupting the painful tableau, "you need to come with us for questioning." "I want my lawyer," Veronica snapped from the car, finding a shred of her former composure. "I'm not saying a word without representation." "That is your right," Agent Callahan acknowledged. Then he turned to Richard. "Mr. Thompson, we will also need a statement from you." "I don't understand," Richard said, his voice hollow, his eyes pleading with me. "Mom, what have you done?" The question, so profoundly backwards, so revealing of his utter inability to see his own culpability, was the final straw. All the pain, the betrayal, the weeks of silent strategizing, erupted to the surface. "What have I done?" I repeated, my voice rising, sharp and clear in the twilight. Neighbors were listening. The FBI was listening. The whole world needed to hear this. "I have protected myself, and countless others, from people who believe they can take whatever they want without consequences. I taught you better than this, Richard. Your father taught you better than this." As agents began to lead a silently weeping Veronica away, she turned one last time, her eyes blazing with a final, futile hatred. Richard remained on the porch, a statue of despair, watching as agents carried boxes of evidence from our home. The life he knew, the future he had chosen, was being physically removed, piece by piece. "Mom," he murmured as I turned to follow Gloria back to our car. The fight had gone out of him. I didn't know. I didn't know everything they were planning. You have to believe me." I paused. I looked back at the face of the son I had raised. I searched his eyes, and for the first time, I saw not a cunning conspirator, but a terrified, lost boy who had gotten in far, far over his head. The anger was still there, a fire in my heart, but for a fleeting second, it was banked by an overwhelming, tragic pity. Perhaps you didn't know everything, I conceded, my voice heavy with the weight of that admission. It was the first crack in my armor, the first acknowledgement that the monster might still contain fragments of the man. But you knew enough, Richard. And you still chose them. You chose them over me. As I walked away, I heard his broken voice behind me, a whisper carried on the evening air. Where am I supposed to go now? I didn't look back. The question echoed the very one I had faced when he threw me out of my own home. The symmetry was a cruel, perfect circle. But unlike my son, I found no satisfaction in his anguish, only a profound, bottomless sadness for the beautiful, terrible thing we had both lost. Some betrayals, I was learning, leave wounds too deep for simple forgiveness. The raid was over, the arrests were made. But the real battle, the war for my soul and the ghost of my sons, was just beginning. The silence in the car on the way back to the suite was a heavy, living thing. Gloria drove, her hands tight on the wheel, her gaze fixed on the road. I stared out the window, but I didn't see the glittering Phoenix skyline. I saw Richard's face, the raw, uncomprehending horror in his eyes as he asked, "What have you done?" He truly didn't see it. He truly believed he was the victim in this nightmare. That was perhaps the most terrifying revelation of all. The human capacity for self-deception is infinite, a fortress built to protect a fragile ego from the shattering truth. Back in the sterile safety of suite, the adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation drained away, leaving me hollow and trembling. My hip, which I had ignored during the standoff with Raymond and the showdown with Richard, now screamed in protest, a sharp, insistent pain that demanded payment for my bravery. Gloria helped me to the armchair, fetched my painkillers, and made a pot of strong tea. She moved around the small kitchenette with a practiced efficiency, a silent testament to our 40 years of friendship. She knew I needed the silence, the space to process the earthquake that had just ripped through my life. He didn't know, I finally said, the words sounding foreign on my tongue. I was testing them, seeing how they felt. Not all of it, not the depth. Gloria placed a steaming mug of tea on the table beside me. She didn't sit. She leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. Is that what you believe, or what you need to believe? The question was a scalpel, precise and unflinching. That was Gloria. She would never offer me the comfort of a lie. I saw his face, Gloria, when he realized I was with the FBI. That wasn't the face of a man who had been caught in a complex conspiracy he helped orchestrate. That was the face of a boy who'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar and couldn't understand why the whole kitchen was being demolished around him. A boy who is facing federal prison time, she reminded me, her tone gentle but firm. A boy who will say and do anything to mitigate that. I know, I whispered, closing my eyes. I know that. But what if the truth is somewhere in the middle? What if he was their useful idiot? The key they needed to get to me, but not a willing participant in the full, monstrous scope of it. Before Gloria could answer, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, her expression turning grim. It's Marcus Reed, Richard's public defender. She put it on speaker. Gloria Evans. Miss Evans. The young lawyer's voice was strained, tired. I'll get straight to the point. My client has requested a meeting with his mother. He says he wants to explain his side of things. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone, gave a painful, traitorous lurch. He wants to explain. What is he offering? Gloria asked. All business. Is he prepared to cooperate? To give a full statement against the Sterlings? There was a pause on the other end. He says he wants his mother to understand. He claims Veronica and Raymond kept him in the dark about the extent of their operation. He says the power of attorney was meant for medical decisions, and he was manipulated into using it for financial transfers he didn't fully comprehend. The excuses. They were exactly what I would have expected. And yet, a part of me, the mother part that refused to die, clung to them. "And what does he want from Mrs. Hayes?" Gloria pressed, her eyes meeting mine. "Officially, nothing. He just wants to be heard. Unofficially." Marcus Reed sighed. "Unofficially, my impression is he hopes that if she understands his perspective she might be sympathetic with the prosecutors. A mother's plea for leniency can carry significant weight. There it was, the ask. He wanted me to clean up his mess, just as I always had. To use my influence, my credibility, to soften the consequences of his actions." Gloria's eyebrow arched. She didn't need to say anything. Her expression said it all. "I told you so, Mrs. Hayes is under no obligation to meet with him," Gloria said into the phone. "Given the circumstances, it could be emotionally detrimental." "I understand," Reed replied, "but the request is genuine. He's shaken. Seeing her today, with the FBI, it broke something in him. I think he's finally realizing what he's done." I looked at Gloria, then nodded slowly. "We'll consider it," Gloria said. "I'll be in touch." She ended the call and looked at me. "You don't have to do this, Isabella. You owe him nothing." "I know," I said, my voice quiet but resolute. "But I owe myself the answers. I need to look him in the eye, in a quiet room, and hear his story. I need to know, once and for all, who my son really is." The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon in a stark beige interview room at the Federal Building. It was a different kind of confrontation. No sirens, no neighbors, no flashing lights. Just a metal table, uncomfortable chairs, and the devastating intimacy of a family tearing itself apart. Gloria sat beside me, a pillar of silent support. When the door opened, I barely recognized the man who walked in. The confident executive from the bank video was gone. This Richard was disheveled. He wore wrinkled khakis and a plain t-shirt provided by the detention center. He had a shadow of stubble on his jaw, and his eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He looked young and terribly, terribly lost. "Mom," he said, his voice raspy as he took the seat across from me. His lawyer, Marcus Reed, sat beside him, a notebook open, his expression serious. "Richard," I greeted, my voice neutral. I would not make this easy for him. He had to earn every word. A tense, heavy silence filled the room. It was broken by Marcus Reed. "Mrs. Hayes, my client requested this meeting to clarify aspects of the situation he feels have been misunderstood." "I'm listening," I said, my gaze fixed on my son, not his lawyer. Richard cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on the scratched surface of the table. "First, I want you to know I never wanted things to go this far. When we talked about Veronica's parents moving to Phoenix, it was supposed to be temporary, just until they found a place of their own. It was a pathetic, flimsy opening. I didn't interrupt. I let him build his house of cards." "And the power of attorney," I prompted, my tone icy. "The one you handed me the night before my surgery. The one you told me was just a medical formality." He flinched, his gaze dropping further. That was Veronica's idea. She said it was a precaution. In case decisions needed to be made while you were recovering, she said it was standard. Yet you used it to transfer the deed to my house. "You used it to empty my investment accounts," I stated, each fact a hammer blow. He glanced at his lawyer, who gave a barely perceptible nod. "Keep going." "That was all Veronica and Raymond," Richard said, the words tumbling out in a rehearsed rush. "They said they were moving funds to safer investments for your retirement. They handled all the paperwork. I didn't know they were actually stealing. I watched his face, the play of emotions. There was fear, yes, desperation. But was there genuine remorse, or just the panic of a man who had finally been cornered? The house, I insisted, leaning forward slightly. You yourself stood in the doorway and told me I couldn't come back. You looked me in the eye and said it was no longer mine. His shoulders slumped. Veronica, she convinced me it was for the best. She told me the house was too much for you, that you'd be happier in a senior living community. That we were helping you. He swallowed hard, the words sounding absurd even to him. By packing your things in boxes in the garage. The calm I had maintained began to fracture. That's not helping, Richard. That's cruelty. I know, he murmured, the sound barely audible. Now I know. There it was, the core of it. He had allowed himself to be convinced. He had traded his own judgment, his own morality, for the approval of his wife and the promise of a wealthier, easier life. What did they have over you? I blurted out, the question that had tormented me for weeks, finally breaking free. Veronica and her parents. What power did they hold that you would betray your own mother like this? Richard's head snapped up, surprised. Marcus Reed shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Hayes, we should focus on— No, Richard interrupted, his voice gaining a shred of strength. She deserves to know. He took a deep, shuddering breath as if stepping off a cliff. 3 years ago, I made some bad investments. Very bad. I lost a lot of money. Our savings, part of our retirement fund. I was desperate to get it back before Veronica found out. The confession hung in the air. It was the first piece of the puzzle that wasn't a flimsy excuse. It was a motive. Raymond offered to help. Richard continued, his voice thick with shame. He said he had secure investment opportunities. He lent me money. And then it became more complicated, I guessed, the pattern becoming clear. He nodded, a miserable, jerky motion. Yes, I signed papers. I got involved in their businesses without really understanding what they were about. By the time I realized what was happening, I was in deep. I was caught in several of their schemes. They had leverage over you, Gloria observed, breaking her silence. They had me, Richard corrected, his voice bitter. Veronica made it clear that if I didn't cooperate with their plans, her father would make sure I took all the blame. I was trapped. I tried to process this. The weak, financially reckless man he described was a stranger to me, but it was a stranger that made a terrible kind of sense. The pressure, the blackmail, it didn't justify his actions, but it provided a context that was more human, more tragic than the cold-eyed conspirator of the notebook. And my house? My accounts? I asked, my voice softer now. What was that? A test, he admitted, the word tasting like poison. A test of loyalty, to show I was committed to the operation. Veronica said that once the neighborhood was rezoned, we'd make enough money that I could comfortably place you somewhere nice. The brutality of the calculation was breathtaking. I was a line item in his debt repayment plan. Did you actually believe that? I couldn't hide the disbelief in my voice. I wanted to believe it, he replied, his voice barely a whisper. It was easier than accepting what I was really doing. The raw, unvarnished honesty of that admission disarmed me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was not looking at a monster or a stranger. I was looking at my son, the boy who, when caught in a lie, would eventually crumble and tell the truth, no matter how much it hurt. He was weak, he was a coward, he had committed unforgivable acts. But he was not a Sterling. There was buried deep beneath the rubble a shred of the conscience we had tried to instill in him. Richard, I said carefully, what exactly are you asking of me today? For the first time he held my gaze. Nothing, Mom. I don't deserve your help or your forgiveness. I just. His voice cracked. I needed you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was weak, and I was scared, and I made terrible, terrible decisions. Whatever happens now, I'll accept it. He wasn't asking for a get-out-of-jail-free card. He was asking for a shred of understanding. And in that moment, against all odds, I gave it to him. I believe you, I said. The words hung in the air, simple and profound. They didn't erase the crime, they didn't promise forgiveness, but they acknowledged a painful, complicated truth. The interrogation was over. The real reckoning had just begun. Believing him was one thing. Forgiving him was a chasm I could not yet cross. The drive back to the suite was shrouded in a heavy, contemplative silence. Gloria respected it, her focus on the road, but I could feel the weight of her unasked questions. I had given Richard a thread of grace, and she was worried about where that thread might lead. The image of him in that interview room, broken, ashamed, finally truthful, was seared into my mind. It had changed the chemistry of my anger, transmuting it from a clean, sharp blade of hatred into a more complicated, corrosive ache. Pity is a dangerous emotion. It clouds judgment. It makes you want to build bridges over bottomless chasms. We had just stepped back into the suite, the impersonal air greeting us like an old acquaintance, when Gloria's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. "It's Agent Rips." She answered, putting it on speaker. "Gloria Evans, we just got back. I need you both to come back to the federal building." Agent Rips's voice was clipped, urgent, devoid of its usual professional calm. "Immediately. There's been a development. A significant one." My blood ran cold. "What kind of development?" I asked, my voice tight. A pause on the other end. "It's better we discuss this in person, Mrs. Hayes. We're in conference room 4B. Please, hurry." The call ended. Gloria and I exchanged a look. The fragile understanding I had just forged with Richard suddenly felt like a house of cards in a gathering storm. We drove back to the federal building in a silence fraught with tension. What could possibly be more significant than the financial fraud, the property scheme, the betrayal of a son? My mind, trained to follow patterns to their darkest conclusions, began to race down paths I didn't want to travel. Conference room 4B was a small, windowless space, colder and more clinical than the interview room. Agent Rips and Agent Callahan were there, along with another man I didn't recognize, who was introduced as a forensic accountant. The air in the room was thick with a grim anticipation. "Mrs. Hayes," Agent Rips began, her expression carefully neutral. "As part of the execution of the search warrants on the Sterling's properties in Dallas, a team discovered a hidden safe in Raymond's office. Inside, they found something concerning. She didn't use a laptop this time. Instead, she placed a plain manila folder on the table and slid it toward me. It felt ominously heavy. "I need you to look at these and tell me what you see," she said. I opened the folder. The top item was a photograph. It was a close-up, slightly grainy, but horrifyingly clear. It showed a hospital room. A patient lay in the bed, unconscious, face pale against the white pillow, an oxygen cannula in her nose, an IV line taped to her arm. It was me. I was looking at a photograph of myself, taken while I was in the ICU. A wave of nausea washed over me. The violation was so intimate, so profound, it stole the air from my lungs. How? I managed to choke out. "There are more," Agent Rips said softly. I flipped to the next one. Another angle. A wider shot showing more of the room. The next, a close-up of the medical monitors by my bedside. The timestamps on the photos were from different days during my 3-week hospitalization. Beneath the photographs was a stack of documents. My medical records, doctor's progress notes, medication charts, nursing reports, documents that should have been under the strictest protection at Phoenix General Hospital. How did they get these? Gloria asked, her voice sharp with a lawyer's outrage. But I could hear the underlying tremor of fear. That's what concerns us, Agent Rips replied. The timestamps on these photos don't correspond with regular visiting hours. And these documents contain information that family members wouldn't normally have access to. A shiver, cold and sharp as an icicle, pierced my heart. I understood what she was implying before she even said the words. Someone inside the hospital was working with them, I whispered. Agent Rips gave a single grim nod. We've identified a nurse who was assigned to your post-surgical care, Miranda Jenkins. Phone records show multiple calls between her and a number registered to a Sterling shell company during your hospitalization. But why? I asked, my mind reeling, struggling to find a logical, non-monstrous reason. Why would they need this? To monitor my condition? Gloria's face had turned ashen. She was examining the medication charts with a terrifying intensity. Isabella, she said, her voice low and deadly serious. Look at this. She pointed to a note on one of the charts. It was a dosage adjustment for my post-surgical pain management. The original prescription had been crossed out. A new, higher dosage was written in a different, messier handwriting. Your recovery took much longer than expected, Agent Rips said, her words measured, careful. The infection that kept you hospitalized for 21 days. Instead of the usual 5 to 7, we are investigating the possibility that it might have been deliberately prolonged. The implication hit me with the force of a physical blow. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Are you saying they tried to? I couldn't finish the sentence. The words were too monstrous to speak aloud. We're not making any accusations yet, Agent Rips clarified swiftly, but her eyes held a terrifying certainty. But we are investigating the possibility that someone may have intentionally manipulated your medical care to give the Sterlings more time to execute their plans. The pieces, sharp and horrifying, began to click into a picture of such calculated evil that my mind recoiled from it. The scheduled surgery in the emails, the guaranteed vulnerability. It wasn't just a metaphor. They had worked to make it a reality. They hadn't just waited for me to be weak. They had conspired to make me weaker. Does Richard know about this? I managed to ask, my voice a thin, reedy thing. Not yet, Agent Rips replied. We wanted to inform you first, due to the very personal nature of this discovery. Gloria placed a steadying hand over mine. Her touch was ice cold. Isabella, if someone intentionally altered your care, this case escalates exponentially. We're no longer just talking about fraud and elder abuse. We're talking about possibly attempted. I know, I interrupted, unable to hear the word. It was too vast, too terrible to confront directly. My own life, my very breath, had been a variable in their equation. Something to be managed, controlled, perhaps even snuffed out if it became too inconvenient. There's something else. Agent Rips continued, her discomfort palpable. She placed one final document on top of the pile. It was a life insurance policy. In my name. I stared at it, the bold letters swimming before my eyes. The beneficiary was listed as Richard Thompson. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in. The air grew thick and impossible to breathe. I felt the last fragile pillars of my world crumble into dust. Richard knew, I whispered, the certainty a poison in my veins. He had to know. Not necessarily, Agent Rips warned, though her voice lacked conviction. The application bears his signature, but we've already identified several forged documents in this case. We need to investigate this further before we draw any conclusions. But I wasn't listening. The image of Richard in the interview room, his eyes full of seemingly genuine remorse, shattered into a million deceitful fragments. Had it all been an act? Had his confession been just another move in the game, designed to soften me up before this even darker truth was revealed? If he had known about this, if he had been complicit in a threat against my very life, then there was no son left to save. There was only a monster. I closed my eyes, trying to ward off the tidal wave of betrayal. When I opened them, my vision was clear, my resolve hardened into something colder and more terrible than ever before. "I need to see him again," I said, my voice flat, devoid of all the fragile emotion from just an hour before. "Right now." "Mrs. Hayes, with this new information, we strongly advise against that," Agent Rips began. "I need to see his face when he hears this," I insisted, cutting her off. My tone brooked no argument. "That's how I'll know. After 21 years as a compliance officer and a lifetime as a mother, I have a pretty good ability to detect a lie. I have to look him in the eyes when this bomb drops." Rips hesitated, then exchanged a look with Callahan, who gave a slow, reluctant nod. "We were going to question him about these findings anyway," she conceded. "If you insist on being present, we can arrange it." We returned to the interview room. Richard and Marcus Reed were still there, looking expectant, perhaps hoping my return signaled a change of heart. Reed leaned forward, immediately on alert as the agents and I filed back in. "Agent Rips," he said, his voice tense, "my client has cooperated fully. If you're implying he participated in any kind of—" "I'm not implying anything yet," Rips interrupted, her voice like steel. "I'm asking for an explanation of these documents." She placed the life insurance policy on the table in front of Richard. He looked down at it, his brow furrowed in confusion. Then, as he read it, his face underwent a terrifying transformation. The confusion melted into disbelief, then into raw, unadulterated panic. I can't explain this," he stammered, his voice rising an octave. "I had nothing to do with it. Veronica handled all our insurance matters. She said we were just updating our policies. I signed whatever she put in front of me." He was babbling, his eyes wide with a fear that looked terrifyingly real. It wasn't just the fear of consequences. It was the true, primal horror of someone realizing the person they loved was capable of something unspeakable. "Do you realize what this means, Richard?" I asked, my voice quiet, deadly. "Your wife and her parents weren't just planning to steal from me. They were planning something far, far worse." He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders beginning to shake. A low, guttural moan escaped him. "Oh God," he whispered, the sound muffled by his palms. "What have I done? What have I allowed to happen?" Seeing my son confront the true, monstrous nature of his wife's betrayal, I felt an unexpected, unwelcome wave of compassion. The life insurance policy, his signature was likely just another forgery, another way the Sterlings had bound him to them without his full comprehension. He had made terrible decisions. He had betrayed me in ways that seemed unforgivable. But in that moment, I believed him. He was a victim, too. Another pawn in a game far darker than he had ever understood. "I need to amend my statement," he suddenly said, looking up with a new grim determination, his face streaked with tears. "I need to tell you everything I know about Veronica and her parents. Everything." A devastating revelation had shattered the little that remained of my world. The evidence suggested a plot that went beyond greed, into a realm of pure evil. Yet, when confronted, my son's genuine horror told me what I desperately needed to know. He was guilty of so much, but he was not guilty of this. And in the wreckage of our family, that small, terrible distinction felt like the first fragile seed of something that was not yet forgiveness, but was, perhaps, the beginning of understanding. The drive back to the suite for the second time that day felt like traveling through a different world. The city lights of Phoenix, which usually sparkled with a kind of indifferent beauty, now seemed like a million cold, watching eyes. The unthinkable truth was no longer a theory. It was a cancer growing in the dark, and we had just begun to scrape at its surface. Richard was now in a separate interrogation room, with Agents Rips and Callahan, amending his statement. The words sounded so sterile, so bureaucratic, for what was undoubtedly a torrent of confession, fear, and the final, painful dissolution of his marriage. He was giving them Veronica. He was giving them Raymond and Claudia. He was trading every last shred of his old life for a chance at a future that would now forever be defined by prison bars and regret. Gloria and I did not go back to the suite. We were taken to a smaller, more secure office within the federal building. We were given bad coffee and left to wait. There was no conversation. What was there to say? The landscape of the case had shifted from fraud to something that felt like attempted murder. The words hung unspoken in the air between us, too heavy to give voice to. It was several hours before Agent Rips returned. She looked exhausted but wired, her eyes burning with a cold fire. She carried a new, thicker file. "It's worse than we imagined," she said without preamble, dropping the file on the desk with a definitive thud. Richard's testimony, combined with the evidence from the Dallas search, it's a pattern. A long-standing, sophisticated operation targeting the elderly and the vulnerable. She opened the file. It was a roster of names, dates, properties. 17 properties, she said, spreading a map across the desk. All acquired through the same fraudulent methods, all channeled through shell companies linked to the Sterlings. This spans 3 states. The sheer scale was staggering. My case was not an isolated incident. It was part of an assembly line of misery. And the nurse? I asked, the question a dry rasp in my throat. Miranda Jenkins. Did she admit it? Agent Rips's expression turned to one of pure disgust. She's cooperating. Flipped almost immediately to save her own skin. She paused, choosing her words with care. According to her statement, she was ordered to prolong your recovery period. She adjusted your medication dosages and introduced a mild bacterial contamination during IV changes. The clinical terms did nothing to soften the brutal reality. My stomach churned. A mild bacterial contamination. A calculated act meant to keep me weak, trapped, and out of the way. She could have killed me, I stated, the words flat. She claimed she calibrated it to cause a prolonged hospitalization without risking your life, Rips added, her tone making it clear how little she believed that provided any moral absolution. As if playing Russian roulette with someone's health was somehow acceptable if you only put 1 bullet in the chamber. And Veronica? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She orchestrated this? Raymond Sterling made the initial contact with Jenkins. Agent Callahan confirmed, entering the room. He looked even grimmer than Rips. But the evidence, text messages recovered from Veronica's phone, show she was the project manager. She asked precise questions about your treatment schedule, your medication regimen, your anticipated discharge dates. She was micromanaging your suffering. I closed my eyes, trying to assimilate the calculated cruelty. My own daughter-in-law, the woman who had eaten at my table, who I had welcomed into my family, had been on the other end of a phone, coolly discussing how to keep me sicker, longer, to facilitate her theft. The hatred I felt in that moment was a clean, white-hot flame. It was easier to feel than the devastating hurt. And Richard's involvement in this? Medical manipulation? Gloria asked, voicing the question I was too afraid to form. We found no evidence that he knew, Rip said, and I felt a fraction of the tension in my shoulders release. It was a small, pathetic relief, but I clung to it. His cooperation has been extensive, and we believe it's genuine. The prosecution considers his testimony crucial to securing convictions against the Sterlings for the full scope of their crimes. He was a traitor, but he wasn't a would-be murderer. The difference was significant, even if it didn't erase the pain of his other betrayals. "Is there anything else I should see?" I asked, my voice weary. "How much more could there be?" Callahan slid another folder toward me. This was recovered from Veronica's private email. It's the roadmap. Inside were emails dating back nearly 2 years. They outlined a plan with meticulous, chilling detail. Phase 1. Isolate Isabella from friends and family. Phase 2. Gradually appropriate financial affairs. Phase 3. Relocate target to a long-term care facility once all assets are under legal control. They had been stalking me for years. My physical decline wasn't just an opportunity, it was a variable they had been waiting for, a key to unlock the final stage of their plan. My hands trembled as I read. They had targeted me long before my hip surgery was even scheduled. They saw me not as a person, but as a portfolio of assets to be liquidated. And this, Callahan continued, his voice dropping, is perhaps the most disturbing. He placed a glossy brochure on the table. It was for a luxury retirement community in a remote part of Arizona. It was accompanied by a printed email from Veronica to her parents. "Perfect location for Isabella once everything is finalized," the email read. "Isolated, minimal supervision, and the memory unit admits patients without too much medical documentation. Once she's there, we'll have absolute control over all visits and communications." The room swayed. I gripped the edge of the desk. They hadn't just planned to steal my money and my house. They had planned to steal me. My freedom, my dignity, my connection to the outside world. They were going to bury me alive in a memory unit, a place for those with dementia where my protests would be dismissed as the ravings of a confused old woman. I would have been a ghost, forgotten while they lived my life in my home. "There will be additional charges based on this evidence," Rips explained, her voice cutting through my horror. "Elder abuse, conspiracy, and possibly attempted homicide, depending on how the prosecutor interprets the medical manipulation." I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The magnitude of what they had planned, the calculated destruction of not just my financial security, but my very personhood, was almost impossible to assimilate. This was more than greed. This was a profound, soul-deep evil. Through the numbness, one clear, desperate thought emerged. "When can I go home?" I asked. It was the question that had haunted me for weeks. My house was a crime scene, violated and stained, but it was still my home. It was the only ground I had left to stand on. "The forensic team finished at your residence yesterday," Callahan replied. "Technically, you could return now, although we recommend waiting until we can do a full security sweep." "I want to go today," I responded, my voice firmer than it had been all night. "I need to be back in my own space." Gloria squeezed my hand in support. "I'll stay with you for the first few days. We can install additional security if needed." Rips nodded. "We can arrange that. But there's another matter to address." She hesitated. "Richard has requested another meeting with you. He'll be transferred to a minimum security prison pending trial, and he's asked to see you before that." My first instinct was a visceral refusal. The wound was too fresh, the revelations too monstrous. I wasn't sure I had the strength to look at him without seeing the shadow of the life insurance policy, without hearing Veronica's emails in my head. Yet, the image of him in that second interview, his horror so genuine, his determination to talk so absolute, rose in my mind. The mother who remembered the boy he once was couldn't refuse that final request. "Tomorrow morning," I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. "I'll see him, then. The full extent of the might. The evil was now laid bare. It was a tapestry woven with threads of fraud, conspiracy, medical manipulation, and a plan for psychological imprisonment. As I prepared to finally walk back through the door of my house, I understood that the fight was no longer just about reclaiming property. It was about reclaiming my own story from the monsters who had tried to write its ending. The porch felt different under my feet. It wasn't just the physical act of standing there again, key in hand, with the FBI seal and the broken door jamb as stark reminders of the violent re-entry. It was the weight of the journey that had brought me back. The hospital room, the hotel suite, the federal interrogation rooms, they were all waypoints on a map of betrayal that led right back to this single point, my front door. Gloria stood beside me, a silent sentinel. "Take your time," she murmured, her voice soft in the quiet of the afternoon. "This is going to be difficult." She was right. This wasn't a triumphant homecoming. It was a walk through a haunted house, where every ghost was a memory they had tried to kill. I took a deep breath, the air smelling of desert dust and, faintly, of the lemon verbena I used to plant by the steps. They hadn't managed to erase everything. I turned the key. The lock, which they had not bothered to change on this door, clicked open with a sound that was both familiar and foreign. I pushed the door open and stepped across the threshold. The smell was the first assault. The faint, comforting scent of old wood, lavender sachets, and the particular aroma of a life lived well. It was all buried under a layer of foreign perfume, expensive but cloying, and the sharp, clean sting of industrial-grade disinfectant. They had tried to scrub me out. They had tried to impose their own sterile identity over the warm patina of my history. I stood in the entryway, my cane firm on the floor, and just looked. The living room was both the same and utterly different. The bones of the room were there, the fireplace Anthony had built, the built-in bookshelves we'd filled together. But the soul was gone. My furniture had been rearranged into a cold, impersonal configuration. My books were gone, replaced with generic, decorative book sets, their spines uncracked. The curtains were new, a garish, modern pattern that fought with the room's classic style. "It's a showroom," I whispered, the words aching in my chest. "It has no life." "We can put everything back the way it was," Gloria assured me, her hand a comforting pressure on my back. "We can make it yours again." I nodded slowly and began to walk, a slow, painful pilgrimage through the ruins. Each room held its own specific violation. In the study, Anthony's desk was still turned away from the garden. I walked to it and, with an effort that made my hip protest, pushed it back toward the window, realigning it with the view he had loved. It was a small act, but it felt like a reclamation. This is his space. This is our space. In the master bedroom, my heart broke anew. My clothes were gone from the closet, replaced by Veronica's array of sleek, expensive suits. My simple, velvet-lined jewelry box on the dresser was empty. The pieces Anthony had given me over a lifetime, the modest diamond earrings for our 10th anniversary, the pearl necklace for my 40th birthday, the emeralds for our 25th, were gone. The FBI had recovered them, I knew, but the fact that strangers' hands had touched those intimate symbols of our love felt like a sacrilege. The kitchen was the deepest cut. The drawer where I kept my collection of handwritten recipe cards was empty. My mother's gingerbread recipe, in her looping cursive. My grandmother's stew, with her cryptic notes in the margin. The card for Richard's favorite chocolate chip cookies, stained with batter and love, they were irreplaceable. They were my family's culinary history, and they had been thrown away like trash, replaced by shiny, soulless cookbooks that had clearly never been used. That disdain felt more personal than the financial theft. It was an attack on my lineage, an attempt to erase the very essence of who I was and where I had come from. As I surveyed the damage, a strange thing began to happen. The initial wave of grief and rage began to recede. and in its place, a steely, unshakable calm settled over me. This house, these belongings, they had been violated, but they were still mine. The Sterlings had taken, but they had not destroyed. I had survived, I had fought. And I was standing here, in the center of the storm, unbowed. They had underestimated my resilience. They had seen an old woman, a widow, a patient. They had not seen the banker, the strategist, the survivor. I turned to Gloria, my decision crystal clear. "I'm staying," I said, my voice strong, filled with a resolve that came from the very core of my being. "Tonight, in my house. Are you sure?" she asked, her concern evident. "Couldn't we start fresh tomorrow? It's so much to process in one day." "I'm sure," I replied, the certainty ironclad. "I am not going to let them keep me away from my own home for another single night. They have taken enough nights from me." As evening fell, Gloria ordered food, but I had no appetite. I made a cup of tea, my tea, from my canister, in my kettle, and carried it out to the back porch. I sat in the lone remaining chair and watched the twilight descend over the garden Anthony and I had planted together decades ago. The garden was a mess, a testament to their neglect. The roses were leggy and wild, the hydrangeas brown and crumpled, the herb patch a lost cause, but the essence was still there. The shape of the paths we'd laid, the stubborn resilience of a few surviving lavender bushes, it could be brought back. It needed care, it needed time, it needed love. Just like me. The physical toll of the day, the emotional whiplash, finally caught up with me. The tension that had been holding me upright seeped away, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But it was a clean exhaustion. The exhaustion that comes after a long and brutal battle, not the helpless fatigue of a victim. Tomorrow would bring the final, painful conversation with Richard before his transfer. It would bring more legal procedures, the slow, grinding wheels of justice. It would bring the long, arduous process of rebuilding my home, room by room, memory by memory. But tonight, I had reclaimed my space. I had faced the ghosts and found that I was stronger than they were. I sat in the growing dark, the familiar sounds of my neighborhood settling in for the night a comforting lullaby. The trauma was not gone. It would always be a part of me, a scar on my soul. But as I sipped my tea in the quiet of my own porch, I understood that a scar is not an open wound. It is evidence of healing. It is proof that you survived. This was not an ending, it was a beginning. A fragile, painful, but fiercely determined beginning. And for the first time since I had woken up in that hospital bed to a world turned upside down, I felt, truly felt, that I was home. The visitation room at the minimum security detention center was a study in muted tones. Pale yellow walls, scuffed linoleum floors, and the low, constant hum of fluorescent lights that leached the color from everything beneath them. It was a place designed for endings, for the quiet, bureaucratic management of broken lives. When Richard was led in, the sight of him in the standard issue uniform, its olive green fabric hanging loosely on his frame, sent a fresh pang through my heart. The boyishness I had sometimes still seen in him was gone, sanded away by shame and the grim reality of his circumstances. He had lost weight. His eyes, when they met mine, were hollowed out, the windows to a soul that had seen its own reflection and flinched. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice rough, as he took the seat across from me. This time, there was no lawyer. This was just us. A mother and her son, separated by a table and an ocean of pain. "It was your decision," I said, keeping my voice calm, neutral. "I would offer no easy comfort. You wanted to see me. Here I am." He nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands, which were clenched tightly together on the table. "They told me about the nurse, what Veronica and her parents planned for you." He swallowed hard. The life insurance." "Yes, I said, offering nothing more. I simply waited. I swear, Mom, I didn't know. His voice cracked on the last word. I knew they wanted the house, your money. That was bad enough, unforgivable. But I never imagined they would. He trailed off, unable to articulate the monstrousness of it. I believe you, I said simply. His head snapped up, surprise widening his eyes. You believe me? About that? Yes. I've seen enough evidence to be convinced you weren't aware of their plans to physically harm me or institutionalize me. I paused, letting the qualification hang in the air. But you did know about their plans to take everything that was mine. You willingly participated in that theft. He flinched but didn't deny it. Yes. Why, Richard? It was the question that had haunted me, the ghost in every room. You grew up with every advantage. Your father and I taught you integrity, respect for others. What happened to that boy? He was silent for a long time, gathering himself. I've asked myself that every night in my cell, he finally said. The easy answer is that I was weak. I was afraid of losing Veronica if I didn't do what she wanted. I was terrified of the financial and legal consequences if her father exposed my involvement in their earlier schemes. He took a shuddering breath. And the difficult answer is that at some point, I started to believe I deserved more than I had earned. That it was justified to cheat to get what I wanted. His voice dropped to a whisper. I became someone I don't recognize. Someone Dad would have been ashamed of. The mention of Anthony was a sharp, precise pain. Your father would be disappointed, I admitted, the truth stark and unavoidable. And I am too. But I think what would disappoint him most wouldn't be that you made mistakes, but that you betrayed your own principles to cover them up. Richard nodded, accepting the judgment without excuse. The prosecutors have offered a plea deal, 5 years reduced to 3 with good behavior, in exchange for my full testimony against Veronica and her parents. He looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time. I'm going to accept it. It's more clemency than I deserve. We sat in the weight of that silence. My son, prison. The words didn't want to fit together in my mind. The future Anthony and I had dreamed for him had been reduced to this sterile room and a number on a sentencing document. I found something in the house yesterday, I said, changing the subject. I reached into my purse and pulled out a worn, yellowed envelope. At the bottom of your father's desk drawer. I slid it across the table to him. He looked at it, his hand trembling slightly as he turned it over to see his name written in Anthony's unmistakable, strong handwriting. I didn't know this existed, he whispered. During his last months, he wrote several letters, I explained. This was the last one. He asked me to give it to you when I thought you needed it most. I think that time is now. I watched, my heart in my throat, as he carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the paper. I remained silent as he read, witnessing the journey of emotions on his face, a wince of pain, a flush of shame, and finally, a slow dawning light of something that looked like determination. When he finished, he folded the letter with a reverent care and pressed it to his chest for a long moment before returning it to its envelope. Thank you for bringing this, he said, his voice firmer. I needed to hear his voice. Again. Even here, what will you do? I asked. Afterward? When you've served your sentence? The question seemed to surprise him. He hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead. I don't know, he admitted. My career is over. My finances. Obviously. My reputation. He gave a helpless shrug. I'll have to rebuild, I told him. Not just practically, but morally, too. That's the hardest work. I know, he said. He hesitated, then asked the question that hung between us, the one that held the weight of everything. Will you ever be able to forgive me, Mom? I thought carefully before answering. I would not offer him platitudes or false promises. The road was too long for that. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Richard. I said. It's a process, a journey. Right now, I'm still processing the pain, the betrayal, the impact of discovering what you became. I held his gaze, ensuring he saw the absolute truth in my eyes. I don't know if complete forgiveness is possible, but I do know one thing. You are still my son. That biological fact, that history, doesn't change. How our relationship will be from now on, that will depend entirely on the decisions you make from this moment forward. He nodded, accepting this partial, painful answer with a grace I hadn't expected. It's fair, he murmured, more than fair. Our time was almost up. A guard approached. As we stood to say our goodbyes, he asked one last thing. The house. Will you stay there? After everything? Yes, I replied, the answer immediate and unwavering. It's my home. I won't let what they did force me to flee the life your father and I built. Good, he said softly, a genuine, sad smile touching his lips for the first time. Dad would have wanted that. As I watched him walk away, his shoulders held with a newfound dignity despite everything, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. It wasn't healing. That would take years, perhaps a lifetime. But it was the beginning of an understanding. My son had made terrible choices. He had betrayed me in ways that might never be fully repaired. But beneath the man who had participated in the Sterling scheme, fragments of the boy I raised still remained. The journey ahead for him was long and dark, but for the first time, he was walking it with his eyes open. Outside, Gloria was waiting in the car. How did it go? She asked as I settled into the passenger seat. As well as could be expected, I replied, watching the world go by. He accepted the plea deal. 5 years, maybe 3. And how do you feel about that? I reflected, allowing myself to fully examine the tangled knot of emotions inside me. Sad, relieved, still angry, but less so than before. I turned to her. Mostly, things feel clear to me now, about what happened, and about where we're going. Gloria nodded, understanding without the need for further explanation. 6 months passed. The legal proceedings ground on, but their outcome was never in doubt. Faced with the mountain of evidence and Richard's damning testimony, Veronica, Raymond, and Claudia Sterling accepted plea bargains. 20 years for Raymond, 15 for Claudia, 18 for Veronica. Their empire of paper and lies was dismantled, brick by brick. The nurse, Miranda Jenkins, received 8 years. The neighborhood was saved. The homes the Sterlings had stolen were returned to their rightful owners or their heirs. A community, once targeted for predation, had united in mutual defense. My home was restored. The furniture was back in its place. The new, garish curtains were gone, replaced with fabrics I had chosen. Gloria and I had just hung the last family portrait on the newly installed shelf in the living room. It looks just like it should, I commented, surveying the room. It was true. It felt like my home again. The scars were there, the reinforced locks, the discreet security system panel by the door, but they were now part of its story, a story of resilience. Better than right, Gloria countered, pointing to the security panel. It's safer now than ever. She was correct. The fragility that had allowed the Sterlings to infiltrate my life had been identified and fortified against. The roses are blooming again, too, I added, looking out the window at the garden, where the spring shoots I had tenderly nursed were now bursting with color and life. Gloria smiled, catching the metaphor. They're coming back. With proper care and time, recovery is possible. The doorbell rang. On the tablet connected to the security camera, I saw a delivery person with a large floral arrangement. Eleanor Jameson, my neighbor and now dear friend, had sent me a beautiful bouquet of lilies and irises for my birthday. The card was simple, kind. The gesture touched me deeply. I was building a new community, one of my own choosing. Later, as we sat on the porch swing, I brought up the idea that had been forming in my mind for weeks. "I've been thinking about the foundation," I said. "The Anthony Miller Medical Research Foundation. I want to expand its mission, add a division focused on elder protection, legal support, fraud prevention, education, victim services." Gloria's eyes lit up. "Using your experience to help others in similar situations." Exactly. The Sterlings had dozens of victims before they targeted me. Most didn't have my resources or knowledge to fight back. I want to change that for others. "That's a wonderful idea, Isabella," Gloria said warmly. "Anthony would be proud." "I think so, too," I replied, looking out at the neighborhood where I had reclaimed my life. As afternoon slipped into evening, we sat in a comfortable silence. The trauma of what I had lived through would never entirely disappear. There would always be moments of sharp alertness, echoes of the betrayal. But those scars no longer defined my existence. They had become a source of a deeper wisdom, a profound empathy, and a renewed purpose. Finding purpose in the scar. That was Anthony's wisdom, not erasing the wound, but allowing it to transform into something meaningful, into something that, with time, could become its own form of beauty. The wicked had been unmasked and punished, and I, with an upright heart, had found the justice, the peace, and the purpose I deserved. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.